Hey everybody, my name is Admiredplague, and I was gonna upload a video a couple days ago covering the PTR for Dune Awakening and what different changes they were making to Dune and the PvE and the PvP and different things for like travel and bases and sieges and all that stuff. But Dune Awakening and Funcom have just pumped out so much stuff and so many patches live that by the time I filmed the video covering the changes to the PTR, they actually already pushed half the stuff onto the live servers. So today they put a massive patch forward onto the live servers that were on the PTR for like a day. So I'm now making this video on the day of the big patch. This is patch 11017. And this is the one, the big one for the deep desert changes for PvE and PvP. But before we get into that, before we get into this big old deep desert section here, let's go back to the bottom and just cover some of the other changes. So let's look at things like, for instance, I think the biggest thing to look at here is going to be our visiting is a big change, and vehicles are a big change. So first and foremost, if we look at the visiting tab here, basically there were restrictions on sieges. So basically, if you were on a server, say a US East server, and then you pick a siege, you can go to any other siege in that server. So for instance, I'm under Pixis, I can go to any siege under Pixis, but I can't build anywhere unless it's my own home siege. They've actually taken away that requirement to be on a home siege. You can now build anywhere with your friends. So if you have a couple of friends on different servers, you can go build over on their servers freely as well, and your base will stay there. You just have to now maintain multiple bases, taxes, and etc. across sieges. So I think that's a pretty cool change because it does allow players that maybe have made characters on the same server but a different siege because there just wasn't enough room on it at launch. I do hope that this is kind of also leading to character transfers to different servers, because there are a lot of friends of mine that weren't able to get onto Pixis when it first came out, and then also definitely couldn't get onto Siege when it first came out. So this is a cool change to see, being able to play with other people on different sieges and kind of see what their economy and things look like on their servers. So I think that's a pretty good change overall. I don't have any quips about that. Vehicles, this is a massive change, especially for Deep Desert. I'll get into this. Basically, the two things we're looking at is the speed of the Scout and the Assault Ornithopters when you attach rocket pods. The biggest problem being that the Ornithopters, Assault and Scout, were going insanely fast even when they were weighed down by the massive balls of players using the rockets in the Deep Desert and other places around Haga Basin. So Funcom has imposed a different speed reduction on the different ones. So in this case, the biggest change actually comes to the Scout Ornithopters. There's no reason why a Scout Ornithopter should be going super deadly fast and then also carrying a crazy payload of rockets on it and completely harassing things that have no way of basically countering the Scout Ornithopter with rocket pods. So now what they've done is actually impose a 20% speed reduction on Scout Ornithopters and 10% reduction on Assault Ornithopters that are using the rocket pods. I think this is a good change. I think this is going to make it to where you have a little bit more of a ground to air dynamic. They've also added in a MK5 rocket launcher that you can now purchase or research and then make at your base using T5 gear. This is also a great change because I feel like the Deep Desert was nothing but Ornithopters flying around and just doing air combat. And if you were on the ground, you really had no way to defend yourself unless you had won a previous launch draw the previous week and actually got the weapons decree to get the rocket launcher, which also cost like 80,000 Solaris. So really not many people were buying the rocket launchers, and they couldn't make the T6 rocket launchers at scale. So I think this is a good change to reduce the speed, add in a rocket launcher. Now you have kind of more of a nice, at least if you have enough people or know what you're doing, you can at least have a chance to survive against an Ornithopter. You can also just pocket your Ornithopter or pull your Ornithopter out and just fly away, whatever. But let's get into the biggest changes, and this is also the biggest block here. I'm not going to go through bug fixes. You guys can read that yourself. The link to the patch notes will be down below in the description. But the Deep Desert is getting it has gotten a massive overhaul, and I'm here to tell you why I don't think it's a terrible idea, but maybe a slight overreaction. So let's roll back a couple of weeks, and you had a bunch of PvE players basically complaining that they had no access to T6 gear, and that is simply because T6 gear and materials are only found in the Deep Desert. Well, the Deep Desert is full-blown PvP once you get past Section A, or well, I guess yeah, A1, whatever. It's a grid. So once you go past the first block from the south, it's all PvP from that point forward. Yay, we love PvP. However, the way it already is set up is that you're going to have less and less nodes on the outskirts of the deep desert, and as you get towards the center, or actually like farther north, you're going to end up with more nodes, a higher quantity of nodes, and just more rare loot and places that you can go do things in. This is to encourage people going farther north, seeking out PvP incursions, and then also fighting over spice, because the farther deep you go in, the more spice shows up and the bigger the plumes are, and yada yada yada. So this was basically meant as a way to like kind of build on the outside, make a temporary base on the outside just to hold your stuff, and then you go farther in. Now what they've done, and the reason why PvE players didn't like this was because PvE players actually had to go PvP to go get T6 mats. Now they've spoken their piece, and Funcom has listened to the PvE players, and PvE players basically said, we're locked out of endgame content, we can't help in the launch rod, we can't help in the deep desert, or we can't get gear from the deep desert because you're requiring us to play PvP. And that's something that everyone wants to do, which I totally understand. I love PvP, but there are some days that I want to just go farm and not have to worry about, you know, someone ganking me or a group of people sitting by my body for too long and basically harassing me until I leave or can find a way to leave, honestly. So PvE players were like, hey, we just want something to do in the deep desert or help in some way. So Funcom made the decision to basically make half of the deep desert PvE friendly, all the way up to E, and then, or like halfway through E, and then everything from E back is all PvE now. There are a couple of pockets like down ships and things like that that are still PvP, but most of those zones now are straight PvE. Now this has made a lot of PvP players very angry, and I don't know why. A lot of players are saying, oh, you've taken away our PvP, we can no longer PvP, we can no longer fight people. You have an entire 50% of the deep desert that's where everyone was at anyway. No one was fighting in block A and B just outside the shield walls. They were fighting where actually things were prevalent. They were fighting where titanium and stravium were actually in abundance, and fighting over spice fields that were deeper into the deep desert. All Funcom did was take the boring desert part at the beginning and just said, you know what, this empty land of just desert and sand that y'all fly over anyway, we'll make that PvE, because there are a few nodes here and there of titanium and stravium that PvE players can now go find safely. And what I like about this change, I think it is an overcorrection, we'll get back to that in a second, but what I like about this change is now PvE players are able to go to the deep desert and slowly get their T6 mats, go back to their bases, make themselves some T6 armor, some T6 weapons, some T6 vehicles, whatever they need to do, and now they're going to feel more comfortable going into the deep desert and actually participating in PvP. I'm a PvP player, and I can tell you right now, when I went to the deep desert, as the way it was before, with it being like 90% deep desert, I can tell you that when I'm even fighting the NPCs in the deep desert, it takes so much ammo and time to kill one single NPC with the highest T5 gear. So in my opinion, I myself didn't even want to go into the deep desert until I had T6 gear. So I had to make tiny little trips out to certain research stations and to the spaceships, and basically sit there for almost an hour and a half to clear them out, because it took that long to kill the NPCs, especially in groups. It took forever. So, with that being said, now I believe, and this is how I'm thinking of this situation, is that people are going to finally be able to get their T6 gear, whether it be weapons, armor, vehicles, whatever, and now maybe they actually might feel like they're comfortable going into the deep desert to go get more rewards, to go get more abundance of titanium and stravium, and now you're going to have, in my opinion, a more fun PvP experience, because you know that the people that are actually in the PvP zones are looking for a fight and or feel like they're comfortable enough to be in a PvP situation, rather than just shoot a guy and they just pull out their ornithopter and they fly off, which is still could be the case. But I think you're going to find a much better, more refined PvP scenario now, with people actually going to the deep desert and exploring the deep desert a bit, and knowing that there is a risk versus reward. Do I sit here for 4 hours and just farm the 3 nodes that I can find in the deep desert in the PvE zone? Or do I risk going 2 blocks forward and go find an entire rock covered in titanium and stravium? So that's where I'm at with the whole like PvP, PvE debate. I don't think that this change has been so significant that it's going to kill PvP as everyone says, but I also think that PvP players are honestly in the minority across all survival crafting games that are like this. I mean, Rust, I think, is the only exception, but even then, Rust official servers typically are playing normal PvE and have like areas for PvP. And I haven't played Rust wrong. I could be completely wrong there, but from when I did play Rust, there were mostly PvE servers, and more people play PvE servers than they did on RP or PvP servers because they just didn't want the hassle. Because they've seen probably all the TikToks and social media accounts of people trolling and griefing all across Rust. And private servers are a thing. Yay, we love private servers. If you think PvP is that important to you, rent a private server. The private servers are also connected to other private servers, so your Deep Desert experience could just be pure PvP, which is cool. Have fun. But I think that this change is an overcorrection, slightly. I do think that going from A to E, like halfway through E, as they mentioned, I think that's a little bit too much of a push through the Deep Desert. I feel like they could have scaled it back to like C and gone 3 blocks, but it's not up to me. I do think that this game being a pseudo live service, though, does it justice because the team can every week reevaluate what's going on in the Deep Desert and in Haga Basin and just see what is going on across the board with who's playing where, who's going to PvP, who's doing all these different things. And I think that Funcom is responsive enough to where if they do see something kind of overcorrecting one way or the other, they can then shift it back and find a balance. I also think that maybe, possibly, they could have just done the reduction in speed on ornithopters first before giving everybody the run-of-the-mill through the Deep Desert in the PvE section. But like I said, I think it might have been a slight overcorrection, but I don't think it's going to kill the PvP. I think it's going to make the PvP actually more enjoyable now, knowing that whoever's in there is looking for a fight. Even as a solo player or going in with like 2 or 3 friends of mine, if they feel like going to the Deep Desert now, because they might be more comfortable at this point. I've been basically solo outfitting all of my guild with T6 materials. So I'm the only one that's actually okay with going to the Deep Desert and possibly getting killed or griefed or ganked or whatever, because I play games like that. That's my favorite thing to do. But I think this is a decent change for those that want to experience the Deep Desert, but maybe at their own pace. So I don't know. What do you guys think in the comments below? Do you think that PvP is completely ruined? Do you think Funcom is overcorrected? Do you think these changes are going to ruin the game? I personally don't think these changes are going to ruin the game at all. This game has been fantastic. I know there's been a very, very loud minority of people saying they want to refund the game now because it's no longer their core game. But at the very start, you have to admit that Funcom did say that PvE players can experience the entire game without ever touching PvP, and that includes T6 materials. So now they're just making good on their promise because they did not launch that way. So that's my opinion. This is my thoughts. I just wanted to get this video out there to talk about the changes. I would love to do more update videos like this where we go through the deeper patch notes. Unfortunately, I just don't have the time right now because I'm still actually trying to get the PTR going because I want to actually test the PTR so I can give you guys more informed opinions and like just different news about what's going on. So that's it for me. Thank you guys for watching. If you guys like this kind of content, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, and share with your friends if you feel like it. And like I said, leave a comment down below if you feel like this is an overcorrection or if this is a good change. I personally think it's an in-the-middle change. I don't think it's the greatest. I don't think it's the worst. I think it's a step in the right direction, though. And I really hope that Funcom's, kind of looks at what's going on and just corrects it. But that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next Dune video. Bye!